Your wife should be home with the kids, not pretending to understand business, the CEO Richard Harrington said to my husband Marcus at the company's annual gala, his voice dripping with the particular condescension of men who'd never had their authority questioned. I saw her asking questions about our Q3 projections earlier. Someone should explain to her that these events are for networking, not interrogation. Wives are supposed to smile and look pretty, not audit the balance sheets. Marcus stood frozen beside me, caught between defending his wife and protecting his career, while 300 employees and their partners mingled around us in the ballroom of the Grand Metropolitan Hotel. But why did I simply smile and excuse myself to the restroom instead of revealing who I actually was? And why did Richard Harrington's confident smirk collapse into confusion when his keynote speech was interrupted by the one signature he never expected to see? Ms. Williams, I've been looking for you everywhere. The CFO, David Okonkwo, caught me in the hallway outside the restroom, his expression mixing relief with urgency. Mr. Okonkwo, is something wrong? The board met this afternoon. The investigation into Harrington's conduct is complete. As majority shareholder, we need your signature on the CEO's termination papers before midnight to ensure proper documentation. I glanced toward the ballroom, where Richard Harrington was preparing to deliver his annual address, a speech celebrating the company's success and, inevitably, his own leadership. Bring the papers to the main stage. David's eyes widened. To the stage? During his speech. He just told my husband that wives should stay home and look pretty. I think it's time the CEO learned who actually owns this company. Ms. Williams, that would be exactly what he deserves. The papers, Mr. Okonkwo. Main stage. 5 minutes. The ownership structure of Meridian Technologies was something I'd kept deliberately obscure. My father, William Williams, had founded the company 40 years ago in his garage, building it from a small electronics repair shop into a multinational technology corporation. When he died 3 years ago, he'd left me 47% of the company's shares, the largest single block of ownership, enough to control any major decision with even minimal board support. But I'd never been interested in public recognition. I'd attended board meetings quietly, voted my shares through proxies when possible, and maintained a distance from the day-to-day operations that kept my identity as majority shareholder unknown to most employees, including, apparently, the CEO. Richard Harrington had been hired 2 years ago, 6 months after my father's death. The board had conducted a nationwide search for a leader who could guide Meridian through its next phase of growth. Richard had impressive credentials: MBA from Wharton, successful turnaround experience at 2 previous companies, a reputation for aggressive expansion. What his resume hadn't revealed was his equally aggressive attitude toward women in business. The complaints had started within months of his arrival. Female executives reported being excluded from key meetings. Women in middle management found their advancement opportunities mysteriously limited. HR documented a pattern of comments, always deniable, always just barely on the right side of legally actionable, that created a culture of dismissal and diminishment. He's old school, board members had explained when I'd raised concerns. His results speak for themselves, others had argued, pointing to rising revenues. We can't fire a CEO for being politically incorrect, the chairman had counseled. But I'd been watching, documenting, waiting for the evidence that would make action unavoidable. The investigation I'd commissioned had been thorough. A law firm specializing in workplace culture had spent 6 months interviewing employees, reviewing communications, and building a comprehensive picture of Richard Harrington's leadership style. The findings were damning. 17 women had experienced direct discrimination. 43 had witnessed inappropriate comments or behavior. The company's female leadership had declined by 34% since Richard's arrival, with most departures citing cultural concerns in exit interviews. The financial costs were substantial: lawsuits waiting to be filed, talent hemorrhaging to competitors, reputational damage that would eventually affect the bottom line. The board had reviewed the report that afternoon. The vote had been unanimous: Richard Harrington would be terminated for cause. All they needed was my signature. I returned to the ballroom as Richard took the stage. The lights dimmed for his keynote, a carefully choreographed moment of corporate theater designed to reinforce his image as the company's visionary leader. "Welcome, everyone, to Meridian's annual celebration of excellence," he began, his voice amplified through the hotel's sound system. "This year has been transformative. Record revenues, expanded market share, innovations that are reshaping our industry." The audience applauded politely. I found Marcus near the back of the room, his expression still troubled from our earlier encounter. "Where did you go?" he whispered. "To handle some business." "Vivian," what he said, "I should have defended you." "You will. In about 3 minutes." "What do you mean?" "Watch." David Okonkwo appeared at the edge of the stage, a leather folder in his hands. He was trying to be discreet, waiting for a pause in Richard's remarks, but the CEO noticed the interruption immediately. David? Is something wrong? I apologize for the interruption, sir. There's a matter requiring immediate attention. It can wait until after. It cannot wait, sir. Board directive. The audience stirred, sensing something unusual. Galas weren't typically interrupted by board directives. Richard's expression flickered between annoyance and concern. Very well. Ladies and gentlemen, if you'll excuse me for just a moment, actually, David said, this matter involves everyone here. May I have the microphone? The murmuring in the audience intensified. Richard clearly wanted to refuse, but denying the CFO access to the microphone in front of 300 employees and their families would create exactly the kind of scene he preferred to avoid. He handed over the microphone with visible reluctance. Thank you. David addressed the crowd with the calm authority of someone who'd spent decades managing corporate crises. As many of you know, the board of directors has certain responsibilities regarding corporate governance. One of those responsibilities is ensuring that our leadership reflects the values we claim to hold. David, this isn't appropriate, Richard started. I'm afraid it is, sir. David turned to the audience. This afternoon, the board completed a 6-month investigation into workplace culture at Meridian Technologies. The findings were significant enough to warrant immediate action. The audience had gone completely silent. Effective midnight tonight, Richard Harrington is terminated as CEO of Meridian Technologies. The board has voted unanimously. However, under our corporate charter, major personnel decisions require the signature of our majority shareholder. David turned toward where I stood at the back of the room. Ms. Williams, would you please join me on stage to complete the documentation? 300 heads swiveled to follow David's gaze. I walked forward through the parting crowd, aware of every eye on me. The wife who should have been home with the kids, the woman who shouldn't have been asking questions about Q3 projections, the person Richard Harrington had dismissed as someone who didn't belong. Marcus watched me with an expression of dawning comprehension. Richard watched me with an expression of growing horror. I reached the stage and accepted the leather folder from David. For those who don't know me, I said into the microphone, I'm Vivian Williams. My father founded this company 40 years ago. When he passed away, he left me 47% of Meridian's shares, the largest single ownership block. I've chosen to remain relatively anonymous in my involvement with the company, preferring to let competent leaders handle day-to-day operations. I turned to face Richard directly. Unfortunately, our current CEO has not proven to be a competent leader. The investigation documents systematic discrimination against women throughout the organization. 17 employees have experienced direct harm. Dozens more have witnessed inappropriate behavior. Our female leadership has declined by over a third in 2 years. This is absurd, Richard interrupted. I've delivered record revenues. You've delivered numbers while destroying culture. That's not leadership. That's extraction. I opened the folder and reviewed the termination documents. The board has determined that your behavior constitutes cause for immediate termination without severance. Do you have anything to say before I sign? Richard's face had gone from white to red to something approaching purple. You can't do this. I have a contract. Your contract includes a morality clause that you've violated repeatedly. Our legal team is confident the termination will withstand any challenge. The board can't just. The board voted unanimously. Every director, including the ones you thought were loyal to you. They reviewed the evidence and decided you're a liability the company can't afford. Because of some complaints from women who couldn't handle. Choose your next words very carefully, Mr. Harrington. Everything said on this stage is being recorded, and I suspect you've already said enough to support several discrimination lawsuits. He stopped, the reality of his situation finally penetrating his fury. You set me up. This whole evening, the questions about Q3, the provocation at our table, you were waiting for me to say something you could use. I didn't need you to say anything. The investigation provided more than enough evidence. What you said tonight was just a reminder of why this decision is correct. I clicked the pen and signed the termination papers with a flourish. You told my husband that wives should stay home and look pretty. That women don't understand business. That my questions about our company's finances were inappropriate. I handed the signed documents to David. Consider this my response. Security will escort you out. Your personal belongings will be shipped to your home. Any severance claims will be handled through legal counsel. The security team appeared on cue, 2 officers who positioned themselves at Richard's sides with professional discretion. This isn't over, he said, his voice low and venomous. You'll regret this. I regret hiring you in the first place. I regret not acting sooner when the complaints started. I regret every woman who left this company because you made it hostile to their success. I met his eyes without flinching. What I won't regret is this moment. He was escorted from the stage, from the ballroom, from the company he'd led for 2 years with results that masked rot. The audience remained silent, processing what they just witnessed. I addressed them directly. I apologize for the disruption to this evening's celebration. What you've just seen wasn't planned as public entertainment, the timing was driven by legal requirements, not dramatic effect. A murmur of uncertain laughter. But I want to be clear about what this means going forward. Meridian Technologies was founded on the principle that good ideas can come from anyone. My father started this company in his garage because he believed talent and hard work mattered more than pedigree or appearance. Over the past 2 years, we've drifted from that principle. Talented people have been overlooked because of who they are rather than what they can do. Voices have been silenced. Potential has been wasted. That ends tonight. The applause started slowly, a few people near the front, then spreading through the room like a wave. I saw women clapping with tears in their eyes. I saw men nodding with expressions of relief. I saw young employees who been afraid to speak up, realizing that the culture they endured wasn't the culture they have to accept. Marcus reached the stage and took my hand. You could have told me, he said softly, beneath the applause. Where's the fun in that? Fun? I've been terrified of that man for 2 years. And now he's gone. I squeezed his hand. I'm sorry I didn't act sooner. I kept hoping he'd change, that the board would hold him accountable, that I wouldn't have to reveal my position so dramatically. But he said what he said tonight. And I decided that if he could be that dismissive to my face without knowing who I was, he'd never change. Some people only respect power they can see. Now everyone knows where the power actually sits. The gala continued after Richard's departure, though the atmosphere had fundamentally shifted. People approached me throughout the evening, employees who wanted to introduce themselves, women who wanted to share experiences they'd been afraid to report, men who wanted to express support for the change in direction. I've worked here for 15 years, one senior engineer told me. Your father hired me straight out of college. The last 2 years have been the hardest of my career. I've thought about leaving almost every day. Will you stay now? If things actually change? Yes. This company was my home before Harrington arrived. I'd like it to feel like home again. The board chairman, Robert Morrison, found me near the end of the evening. That was quite a performance, Vivian. It wasn't a performance. It was a correction. You could have handled the termination privately. The signature could have been obtained before the gala. I could have. But Richard humiliated women publicly for 2 years. His dismissal needed to be equally visible. I accepted a glass of champagne from a passing server. The employees needed to see that discrimination has consequences. That the company's values are more than words in a mission statement. Some board members are concerned about the optics. Which ones? I'd like to know who prioritizes Richard's comfort over the women he mistreated. Robert held up his hands. I'm not disagreeing with your decision. I'm just conveying feedback. Convey this back. Anyone uncomfortable with how tonight was handled is welcome to sell their shares. I'll buy them at market price. Then I'll own an outright majority and won't need to consider feedback at all. The offer to purchase shares was genuine and strategically significant. At 47%, I controlled the company in practical terms, but I still needed some board support for major decisions. At 51% or higher, my control would be absolute. The message was clear: stand with me or stand aside. By the end of the following week, 3 board members had sold their positions. I'd acquired another 6%, bringing my ownership to 53%. The resistance to change had eliminated itself. The interim CEO was Patricia Okonkwo, David's wife, as it happened, and a 30-year veteran of the technology industry. I'd recruited her from semi-retirement specifically for this role. The investigation found problems at every level, she reported during her first board meeting. Hiring practices that disadvantaged women and minorities. Promotion patterns that favored men regardless of performance. Compensation structures that underpaid female employees by an average of 23%. Can we fix it? I asked. We can fix it. But it will take time, investment, and genuine commitment. Band-aid solutions won't work. We need structural change. You have my full support. Whatever resources you need. Even if it affects short-term profitability? Especially then. My father built this company over 40 years. He didn't do it by prioritizing quarterly results over sustainable growth. We're returning to his philosophy. The cultural transformation at Meridian became something of a case study in business schools. Patricia's leadership established new hiring protocols, compensation reviews, and promotion criteria designed to identify and eliminate bias. An independent ombudsman was appointed to handle complaints without fear of retaliation. Leadership training focused on inclusive management practices. The results emerged gradually, then dramatically. Female leadership increased by 45% within 18 months. Employee satisfaction scores rose to the highest levels in company history. Turnover, which had been quietly hemorrhaging talent, dropped by 60%. And the financial performance? Record revenues, achieved through genuine innovation rather than extraction. Richard Harrington's aftermath was less triumphant. He sued the company for wrongful termination, as expected. The lawsuit was dismissed after our legal team presented the investigation findings, documentation so comprehensive that his own attorneys advised against appeal. He attempted to find another CEO position, but the industry had heard the story. The dramatic termination at the gala had been captured on multiple phones and shared across social media. His reputation as a leader was permanently damaged. Last I heard, he was consulting for small companies that didn't conduct thorough background checks. Some people never learn from consequences. They just find smaller arenas in which to repeat their mistakes. Marcus and I navigated the transition from husband of anonymous shareholder to husband of company owner with occasional difficulty. People treat me differently now, he observed one evening. At work, everyone knows who my wife is. They're either overly deferential or suspicious that I'm reporting back to you. Does it bother you? Sometimes. I earn my position through my own work. I don't want people thinking I'm there because of your ownership. You were hired 3 years before Richard knew who I was. Your promotions came on merit. Anyone who suggests otherwise doesn't know the timeline. But the perception can be managed. We can establish clear boundaries. You report to your chain of command, I stay out of your department's decisions. And we maintain professional separation even if people speculate. Will that work? We'll make it work. Unless you'd rather I sell my shares and become a full-time stay-at-home wife, as Richard suggested. Marcus laughed, the first genuine laugh I'd heard from him since the gala. Somehow I don't think that's your calling. Somehow you're right. The anniversary of the gala termination became an unofficial company holiday. Not formally, we didn't put it on the calendar or mandate celebration. But employees remembered the date. They talked about where they'd been when the majority shareholder took the stage, when the CEO was escorted out, when the culture shift began. It was the moment we knew things could actually change, one junior employee told a business magazine interviewing people about Meridian's transformation. Before that night, complaining seemed pointless. After it, we understood that leadership was actually listening. I attended company events more openly now. Not constantly, I still preferred strategic distance to constant presence. But I made sure employees knew who I was, knew that I was paying attention, knew that the values we claimed were values we'd enforce. You've become something of a symbol, Patricia observed during one of our regular meetings. I hope not. Symbols are static. I'd rather be a participant. Whether you like it or not, what you did at that gala resonated. The woman who was dismissed as just a wife turned out to own the company. That story matters to people, especially women who've been underestimated. I was lucky. I had the power to act. Most women who face that kind of dismissal do and have 47% of the company's shares behind them. Which is exactly why using that power publicly mattered. You showed that when women do have power, they can use it to create change. The conversation I'd never had with my father happened often in my imagination. He died before I'd taken any active role in the company, before I'd hired Richard, witnessed his failures, orchestrated his removal. I'd inherited ownership without inheriting his certainty about how to use it. What would he have thought of the gala termination? Of the cultural transformation that followed? Of his daughter, whom he'd raised to be thoughtful and strategic, choosing a moment of dramatic public confrontation? I believed he would have approved. Not of the drama itself, he'd been a quiet man, preferring private conversations to public spectacles. But of the underlying message. Of the defense of women's value in business. Of the insistence that culture mattered as much as profit. He'd built Meridian in his garage with my mother working beside him. She'd been his partner in every sense, contributing ideas, managing finances, solving problems alongside him. The company's success was as much hers as his, though she'd never received public credit. When Richard said wives should stay home, he was dismissing every woman like my mother who'd built value that men took credit for. That's what I couldn't accept. That's why the termination had to be public. Marcus and I attended the following year's gala as genuine partners, not as a manager and his anonymous wife, but as the COO and the majority shareholder. The promotion had been controversial, some board members worried about nepotism, about appearances, about conflicts of interest. But Marcus had earned his advancement through exceptional performance, and I'd recused myself from all decisions regarding his employment. Ready? He asked as we approached the entrance to the Grand Metropolitan Hotel. For what? For being the center of attention. Again. I'm hoping this year is less eventful than last. No dramatic terminations planned? Patricia is doing an excellent job. No termination required. I took his arm. This year, I just want to celebrate. To acknowledge everything we've built, everything we've changed, everything we're still working toward. That sounds almost peaceful. I've earned peaceful. The evening was, in fact, peaceful. Patricia delivered the keynote, a speech about sustainable growth, inclusive culture, and the competitive advantages of treating employees well. The audience applauded genuinely rather than politely. I mingled without agenda, accepting congratulations for the company's success without claiming personal credit. The cultural transformation had been a team effort, driven by Patricia's leadership and implemented by managers throughout the organization. My contribution had been creating the space for change to happen. Removing the obstacle. Providing resources. Staying out of the way when staying out of the way was what helped most. Near the end of the evening, a young woman approached me hesitantly. "Ms. Williams? I'm sorry to interrupt, but I wanted to thank you." "For what?" "I was at the gala last year. I heard what the former CEO said to your husband. I was at a nearby table. When you revealed who you were, when you fired him in front of everyone." She paused, composing herself. I'd been planning to quit the next week. The culture here was unbearable. But after that night, I decided to stay and see if things would actually change. And did they? Yes. Completely. My manager now is supportive and fair. I've been promoted twice. I feel like my contributions are valued. She smiled. "I'm glad I stayed." "I'm glad you stayed too. The company needs people who believe it can be better, even when evidence suggests otherwise." "You believed it could be better." "I knew it had been better. My father created something special. Watching it deteriorate under leadership that didn't share his values was painful. Fixing it was the least I could do." The conversation stayed with me throughout the rest of the evening. One woman's choice to stay. One woman's experience of positive change. One data point in a transformation that had affected thousands. These were the moments that mattered, not the dramatic termination, not the media coverage, not the business school case studies. Individual lives improved. Individual potential unleashed. Individual belief that work could be meaningful restored. My father had built Meridian to create those moments. For 40 years, he'd provided opportunities for people to do their best work in an environment that respected them. 2 years of Richard Harrington had nearly destroyed that legacy. Now we were rebuilding it. Slowly, carefully, sustainably. Marcus found me on the balcony overlooking the city. Escaping the crowd? Reflecting on the crowd. On how different this feels from last year. Last year, I was terrified of my boss and hiding my wife's identity. This year, I'm COO of a company my wife owns, celebrating success we've built together. He stood beside me, looking out at the lights. Quite a transformation. Too dramatic? Just dramatic enough. He took my hand. "I know I said I wished you'd told me who you were earlier. But I've been thinking, if I'd known you owned the company when we started dating, I would have second-guessed everything. Every promotion, every opportunity, every achievement. I would have wondered if it was real or just nepotism. And now? Now I know my career before your father died was entirely my own merit. The promotions afterward, those I've had to examine. But I've done good work. I've earned what I've received. You have. Having a wife who's the majority shareholder is complicated. But I've decided the complication is worth it." He smiled. "Even if you did nearly give me a heart attack at last year's gala." We returned to the ballroom together. The evening was winding down, guests departing with satisfied expressions and genuine warmth. The company that had been fractured by poor leadership was healing, unified by shared values and visible commitment to change. "Next year," I said to Marcus as we watched the crowd, "I want this to be boring. No dramatic interventions. No terminations. Just celebration." "That's a reasonable goal." "I'm serious. I've had enough drama to last a lifetime. Peace and prosperity sound much more appealing." "Then we'll work toward peace and prosperity." He kissed my forehead. "Though knowing you, if someone at next year's gala says something dismissive about women in business, there might be at least a small intervention." "Small interventions I can promise. It's the large ones I'm trying to avoid." He told my husband that wives should stay home and look pretty, not ask questions about Q3 projections. He didn't know that the wife he dismissed owned 47% of the company. He didn't know that the investigation into his conduct had been completed that afternoon. He didn't know that his termination papers were waiting for my signature. When the CFO interrupted his keynote speech to call me to the stage when I signed those papers in front of 300 employees when security escorted him from the building he thought he controlled, he learned exactly who he'd been dismissing. Some lessons are best delivered publicly. Some transformations require visible commitment. And some men only respect power they can see. Now he sees it. Now everyone does. The company my father built is returning to his values, not because I demanded it, but because I created the space for better leaders to make it happen. That's what ownership really means.